It is early morning. The light is thin and gray, the kind that makes everything look like it is still deciding whether to be real. You are standing at your kitchen window with a cup of something warm, watching the yard settle into the day. A crow lands on the fence post near the garden bed. It sits there, still, head angled slightly downward, looking at nothing you can identify. Then it looks directly at you. You do not think much of it. Crows are common. You have seen them drop walnuts on roads to let cars crack them open. You have read that they use tools. You have heard they recognize faces. Smart bird, you think. Clever animal. You turn back to your morning. But here is what you did not think about, what almost no one thinks about, what even the researchers who have spent decades studying these birds cannot fully account for: the crow did not just look at you. According to a growing body of peer-reviewed research from institutions including the University of Washington, Lund University, and the University of Auckland, it may have filed you away into a cognitive system whose architecture, neural basis, and full functional range we still do not understand. The strangeness is not in the behavior. The strangeness is in the mechanism, the part underneath that nobody has yet mapped. Crows, specifically the American crow, Corvus brachyrhynchos *, and the New Caledonian crow, Corvus menegeloides *, perform cognitive operations that the scientific literature consistently describes as remarkable, and then, in the very next sentence, quietly admits it cannot fully explain. The papers exist. The data is real. The conclusions are clear. The question of how, at the neural, developmental, and evolutionary level, remains genuinely, documentably open. This is not a matter of interpretation. This is a matter of incomplete science. And that gap, between what crows demonstrably do and what we can demonstrably explain about why they do it, is one of the more unsettling corners of modern animal cognition research. Welcome to this channel. We cover bird behaviors that science has confirmed but has not yet fully solved. If that kind of documented strangeness is what you are looking for, subscribe. Every video walks through the actual research, the real numbers, and the parts even the researchers could not conclude. Stay with this one through to the final section. What we arrive at, in terms of the crow's neurological situation, is something that took me 3 separate papers to fully understand, and which changes what you are seeing when you watch a crow in your yard. 1. Most people who know about crow intelligence assume it is a product of brain size. The reasoning is intuitive: large brains produce complex behavior. Crows are visibly intelligent. Therefore, crows must have relatively large brains. This is true as far as it goes, but it does not go very far, and the part it leaves out is where things become interesting. In 2016, researchers at Charles University in Prague published a study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences comparing neuron counts across bird and mammal species. What they found was not what most people would have predicted. Corvids, the family that includes crows, ravens, and jays, pack neurons into their forebrains at a density comparable to primates. A crow with a brain the size of a walnut contains roughly the same number of forebrain neurons as a macaque. The neurons are smaller and more tightly organized, which is why the mass is lower but the computational density is not. What makes this genuinely strange is this: the part of the bird brain doing this work, the pallium, is not the same structure as the mammalian cortex. The structures are analogous, not homologous. They arrived at a similar functional outcome through completely different evolutionary paths. Researchers at Tübingen University demonstrated in 2020 that crows show electrophysiological signatures in the pallium that are strikingly similar to the markers of conscious perception in mammals. What they could not establish was whether the underlying mechanism is truly equivalent, or merely convergent, whether crows are conscious in the way we mean when we say the word, or doing something that produces the same outputs through a process we do not yet have the tools to describe. 2. It is widely known that crows remember human faces. This is presented in popular science writing as a charming fact, a piece of animal trivia. What is less often communicated is how rigorously this has been documented, and how much of the underlying system remains unexplained. At the University of Washington, researcher John Marsluff and his team conducted a series of controlled experiments beginning in the early 2000s in which specific humans wore identical masks while either trapping or behaving neutrally toward crows. The crows did not merely remember the threatening mask. They communicated the threat to other crows who had never encountered the masked person. They passed this information across generations. Young crows born after the original experiment learned to respond aversively to a face they had never personally experienced as dangerous. The aversive response persisted, in documented cases, for over 17 years. Marsluff's team used fMRI imaging to confirm that when a crow encountered a threatening face, brain regions associated with fear processing, hippocampal memory consolidation, and social learning all activated simultaneously. The face was being processed as a social entity, not merely as a visual stimulus. What makes this genuinely strange is this: the transmission mechanism. How exactly crows communicate the specific content of a social threat to conspecifics, is not yet understood at a mechanistic level. We know the information transfers. We know it persists. We do not know what signal carries it, whether it is intentionally transmitted, or what the crow's internal representation of dangerous human actually consists of. 3. New Caledonian crows, Corvus moneguloides *, manufacture tools. This has been known since the 1990s. What is less well known is the specific nature of that manufacturing process, and why it creates problems for existing theories of animal cognition. Researchers at the University of Auckland documented, across multiple field seasons, that New Caledonian crows in the wild produce hooked stick tools from the pandanus plant with consistent, species-wide design standards. The tools are not grabbed and used. They are fabricated. The crow selects a specific leaf position on the plant, consistently the basal, not the distal, bends the material, tears it to a consistent width, and shapes a terminal hook with its beak. Different populations of the same species produce tools with recognizably different design conventions, suggesting something that operates like a cultural transmission of technical knowledge. In laboratory settings, Alex Taylor's group at Auckland demonstrated that New Caledonian crows can solve sequential multi-step problems, obtaining a short tool to retrieve a longer tool to retrieve food, without prior training on the specific sequence. The crows did not trial and error their way through it. Several solved it on the first attempt. What makes this genuinely strange is this: tool manufacture at this level was, until very recently, considered a marker of a specific kind of forward planning and mental representation that required a frontal cortex. Crows do not have a frontal cortex. The neural mechanism by which they plan across multi-step sequences without the structure that theory told us was required has not been identified. The theory has been revised. The mechanism has not been found. 4. Here is the scale moment. Sit with this number for a moment before moving on. The telencephalon of a New Caledonian crow, the forebrain, which handles complex cognition, constitutes approximately 79.7% of the total brain volume. In humans, the equivalent proportion is around 76%. A bird with a brain smaller than your thumb is, in terms of the fraction of neural tissue devoted to higher-order processing, allocating more of its total neural architecture to complex cognition than you are. That number comes from a 2019 comparative neuroanatomy study published in Current Biology by researchers including Martin Stacho. It was not presented as a headline. It appeared as one datum in a careful paper about paleoorganization. But it is the kind of number that, once you have read it, quietly reorganizes how you look at a crow standing on a fence post. The number does not tell us what the crow is experiencing. It does not answer the question of whether any of this constitutes awareness in a morally or philosophically meaningful sense. What it does is make it very difficult to argue, with empirical confidence, that whatever is happening inside a corvid brain is simple. What makes this genuinely strange is this: this proportion was not predicted by any model of avian cognition that existed prior to modern neuroimaging. Every model had to be revised when the data came in. Revised models exist now, but they are models of what the brain is doing, not how it produces the specific behaviors we observe. The architecture is partially mapped. The process remains, in the precise scientific sense, unknown. 5. The last documented behavior on this list is perhaps the hardest to frame without either overstating it or understating it. Both errors are easy to make. The documented facts are these. Researchers at multiple institutions, including Lund University in Sweden, have conducted experiments in which crows demonstrate what the literature calls prospective cognition, the ability to plan for a future state they are not currently experiencing. In one class of experiments, crows were trained to cache food. Later, they were allowed to observe another individual, a potential competitor, watching them cache. When this occurred, the crows systematically returned to cached items and moved them to new locations after the observer departed. Critically, they preferentially moved items cached in locations the observer could see, and left items cached in hidden locations largely undisturbed. This is not a conditioned response. It required the crow to model the observer's visual perspective, assess which cached items were at risk, infer the observer's likely future behavior, and take preventive action based on that inference. A 2022 study by Cameron Buckner at the University of Houston reviewed this and related evidence and argued that the data is consistent with, though not conclusive proof of, what philosophers call theory of mind, an animal modeling the mental states of another individual. What makes this genuinely strange is this: the research team at Lund designed multiple controls to rule out simpler explanations. Each simpler explanation was ruled out. What remained in the data, after each alternative had been eliminated, was a behavior that looks, precisely and stubbornly, like strategic deception based on an inferred mental model of another individual's knowledge state. The simpler explanation keeps disappearing. The complex one keeps fitting. It is early morning. The light is thin and gray. You are at the window. The crow is on the fence post. You know, now, that the brain behind that sideways glance contains neurons packed at primate density, operating through a structure that evolution arrived at separately from your own, which produces nearly identical cognitive signatures by a mechanism that has not been mapped. You know that if you were wearing a different face the last time you were in the yard, that face is now filed in a social memory system that will persist for decades and transmit itself to birds that have never met you. You know that the forebrain you are looking at accounts for almost 80% of the total neural volume in that skull, a fraction marginally larger than your own. The yard is the same yard. The crow is the same crow. Nothing has changed except the frame around what you are actually looking at. That is the specific feeling this research leaves you with, not wonder exactly, not comfort, and not strangeness in the loose, vague sense. It is the feeling of standing at the edge of something that science has measured carefully, described precisely, and not yet finished explaining. The crow looks at you. It is doing something. We know it is doing something. We cannot, yet, fully say what. I want to ask you something specific. Have you ever noticed a crow in your yard behaving in a way that seemed deliberately directed at you, not begging for food, not alarmed, just watching you with what felt like attention that had a purpose? Leave it in the comments with as much detail as you can. I read every one.